was lying in that hospital bed, half awake, half gone, when I heard my own daughter whisper to her husband about letting me go so they could finally move on with their plans. I couldn't speak, couldn't open my eyes, but I heard every word. That kind of betrayal doesn't hit you like thunder. It sinks in slow, like cold water rising around your chest. And if you've ever felt a crack like that in your own family, you'll understand why I have to tell this story. I was folding laundry that afternoon, slow and steady, the way my hands have learned to move since retirement. The house felt quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me grateful. After my wife passed, silence became both a comfort and a reminder that I was the last one left standing. I thought I'd made peace with it. I heard drawers opening in the back bedroom, my bedroom. At first, I assumed my daughter was looking for the spare blankets. She and her husband had been staying with me for years now, and I'd gotten used to footsteps in places that were once just mine. But when I reached the doorway, they weren't touching blankets. They were bent over my file cabinet. My daughter didn't even flinch when I cleared my throat. She just said, "Dad, we're checking something. Don't worry about it." Her husband didn't bother looking up. "We just want to make sure everything's organized. These papers get confusing." He said it like I was too old to read. Folders lay open across my desk, my will half pulled out as if it belonged to them. They weren't rifling through random mail. They were sorting through the things I'd kept locked away for decades. Insurance, property deeds, military papers. Parts of my life I'd never asked anyone to manage for me. I asked them what exactly they were looking for. My daughter sighed the way she used to when she was a teenager and didn't want to explain herself. "We just need to see if you listed us properly, Dad. That's all." Properly. As though I was an employee who'd filled out a form wrong. My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed even. Years in the Air Force teach you how to hold yourself when something twists inside your chest. Those papers aren't yours to check. My daughter exchanged a glance with her husband, a small, annoyed look that said I was being difficult. He shrugged like I was overreacting. "We're just trying to help, sir." Help. That word has been stretched so thin it barely means anything. I thought about raising my voice, thought about snatching the folders out of their hands. Instead, I stepped back, let the moment pass over me like cold rain. Arguing would only give them another excuse to decide something on my behalf. I'd spent too many years keeping this house peaceful, too many years swallowing things that scraped me raw to start a shouting match now. I turned away before they could see the sting in my eyes. The hallway felt narrower than usual as I walked toward the front door. My hand brushed the wall, steadying myself. Outside, the late day air carried the faint hum of traffic from Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard. I sat down on the porch steps where I used to drink coffee with my wife on Sunday mornings. My fingers curled into my palms, not in anger, something heavier than that. For most of my life, silence had been my shield, a way to keep the peace, to keep the family together, to keep myself from slipping into bitterness. I'd always believed letting things go made me strong, but sitting there on that step, listening to them shuffle through papers that were none of their business, something shifted. The quiet didn't feel like wisdom anymore. It felt like I was fading inside my own home, 1 inch at a time. When the screen door creaked behind me, I didn't turn around. I stayed right where I was, holding on to the simple truth rising in my chest. If I kept swallowing everything, sooner or later, there'd be nothing of me left to swallow. And I wasn't ready to disappear. The porch boards warmed under my palms as I leaned forward, trying to steady the knot forming beneath my ribs. I didn't know it then, but that small moment, that tiny, almost forgettable moment, was the first crack in the ground beneath my feet. The line I hadn't noticed until I'd already stepped over it. I stood up after a while, brushed the dust from my pants, and walked back into the house without saying a word. The evening settled around us, thick and heavy, carrying a quiet I no longer trusted. The next morning, the house moved around me in small, clipped motions. My daughter set her coffee mug on the counter a little too hard. Her husband paced through the living room like he owned the place. Neither of them said anything outright, but the air carried a kind of stiffness I couldn't ignore. "Dad, you should think about what's practical for us," my daughter murmured while gathering her purse. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a suggestion. It landed like a reminder that some private conversation had taken place without me, shaping the way they now looked at everything, including me. A few days passed and the quiet spread. At a family cookout that weekend, relatives greeted me with polite smiles that didn't sit right. One nephew clapped me on the shoulder. "Heard you've been struggling to keep up with things, Uncle." I hadn't said that to anyone. An aunt leaned in later and whispered, "Baby, don't be stubborn. Let the kids help before something bad happens." No one said where they got those ideas. They didn't need to. Their tone told me enough. My daughter had been planting seeds, and folks were watering them without knowing the soil they were standing on. I drifted toward the porch to catch my breath. A slow ache tightened across my chest, not from age, but from the realization that a story was being told about me, and I'd been cast in the wrong role. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Elena. She worked at Grady Memorial, the place I visited for checkups and blood pressure monitoring. We weren't close, but she always remembered my name and never treated me like an old man fading into the background. She asked if I could stop by for a routine follow-up. I figured the timing was coincidence, though later I'd see it differently. At the clinic, Elena glanced up from her chart the moment I stepped in. She had one of those steady expressions, soft but sharp enough to notice what others missed. "You look worn out," she said quietly after checking my vitals. "Want to tell me what's going on?" I tried brushing it off, told her the family had been a little tense lately. She didn't buy it. Instead, she pulled up a stool and rested her hands on her knees, like she had all the time in the world. "Lines get crossed when people assume age means weakness," she said. "You're allowed to have boundaries, even with your own kids." Her voice didn't push. It simply laid the truth in front of me, the way a good medic lays out tools in an emergency. Calm, precise, necessary. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to shrug and say I'd handle it. Another part sat heavy in my chest, knowing I hadn't handled anything at all. I'd let things slide so long, I couldn't tell if silence was still kindness, or just fear dressed up as patience. Back at home, the lights were still on in the living room. My daughter and her husband spoke in low tones that stopped the second I walked in. They didn't even try to hide the fact that I'd interrupted something. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door. Their voices resumed, softer now, and their glances darted toward me like I was a problem waiting to happen. The fridge door creaked open, I poured myself a glass of water and leaned on the counter for a moment. Their words floated through the air, half sentences, hints, a tone that said they had plans involving my name, my house, my life. The glass warmed in my hand as I stood there, listening without meaning to, wishing I hadn't heard anything at all. I set it down quietly and crossed the room, each step reminding me how small a man can feel in his own home when the people he loves start rewriting the truth without leaving space for him in it. Miss Gloria, my neighbour from 2 houses down, stopped me on the sidewalk as I was taking out the trash. She's never been one to sugarcoat anything, and that morning she looked troubled, like she wasn't sure whether to speak or let it go. "Honey, I ran into your son-in-law at the gas station yesterday," she said. "He told the clerk you've been slipping. Said you weren't keeping up with bills or remembering things." The bag in my hand felt heavier. "He said that?" She nodded slowly. "Said he's thinking of taking over the house paperwork so you don't get overwhelmed." I thanked her and headed back toward the porch. My legs carried me up the steps out of habit, but my mind lagged behind. Slipping. That word echoed through me long after Gloria walked away. I'd paid every bill on time for decades, managed a mortgage, raised a child alone, handled repairs from roof leaks to busted pipes. Losing my mind had never been part of the picture. Still, doubt crept in. Maybe I had been sharper once. Maybe they saw something I didn't. Inside, the mail was already stacked neatly on the counter. Too neatly. My daughter must have sorted it while I was out, and half the envelopes I expected weren't there. A few days earlier, I'd also noticed my phone log looked thinner than usual, as if calls had been cleared. When I asked about a missing letter from the VA, she shrugged. "Probably got lost in transit, Dad. Happens." It didn't sit right, but arguing felt pointless. Every question I raised turned into a gentle scolding or a look that said, "There he goes again." Later that afternoon, I went through the drawers in my study. A few documents I kept track of religiously couldn't be found. My retirement statements, a copy of my late wife's insurance, even the list of emergency contacts. Gone or moved. I opened and closed drawers, shuffled through stacks, checked behind the printer. Nothing showed up. My hand reached for the small notebook I used years ago to track expenses during harder times. The cover was worn, pages yellowed at the edges. Something told me to use it again. Not out of paranoia, out of survival. I sat at the desk, turned to a blank page, and wrote down every bill I'd paid that month. Then every document I still had. And the ones missing. My handwriting wavered at first, but steadied as the page filled. It felt like building a fence around something that still belonged to me. From the hallway, muffled voices floated toward me. "He gets confused," my daughter whispered. Her husband answered, too low for me to catch the exact words, but the tone belonged to someone telling a story they'd rehearsed. I closed the notebook, placed it in the bottom drawer, and slid the chair back. A quiet knock of wood against wood, the kind of sound no one else would notice. The evening moved on, each minute stretching longer than the one before. I found myself checking the front window, the mailbox, even my phone, as if something would reappear simply because I wanted it to. When nothing did, I returned to the desk, opened the drawer, and added a few more notes. Dates, small details, little reminders to myself of what had happened and when. It wasn't fear pushing me, just a growing awareness that I needed to keep track of things. No one else seemed willing to leave in my hands. My sister invited us for Sunday dinner, the kind she'd kept going since we were kids. Folks crowded into her dining room, nieces laughing in the kitchen, uncles arguing about football. The usual noise that used to make me feel rooted. I was reaching for a plate when my daughter raised her voice, just enough for the whole table to catch it. "We're helping Dad with his finances from now on. He's getting older, and it's too much for him to manage." Conversations around us thinned out, replaced by polite nods, and a few murmured, "That's good of you." Her husband added, "We've already talked to the bank about updating access, so everything will be safer." My fork paused mid-air. "Updated how?" He flashed a careful smile. "Just routine stuff. We'll make sure bills and withdrawals are handled properly." Handled properly. Like I'd been reckless with my own money. A few relatives exchanged glances, pitying ones. Someone down the table whispered something about age catching up, and I felt heat rise in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like a quiet collapse. I asked my daughter to step aside so we could talk privately, but she waved me off as if the issue had already been settled. "Dad, it's done. This is better for everyone." My hand tightened around the back of a chair to steady myself. I'd spent decades building that retirement account. Long nights fixing machinery at the airport, extra shifts so my daughter could join the school choir. Years of saving pennies and stretching dollars. Losing access wasn't just an inconvenience. It stripped away a piece of who I'd been all my adult life. I didn't cause a scene, didn't raise my voice. I simply walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, and rinsed my hands under the warm water, even though they weren't dirty. Folks drifted past me carrying dishes, unaware that something essential inside me had shifted a little further off balance. When dessert was served, the kids sliced cake and passed slices around the room. My daughter set a plate in front of me without making eye contact. The frosting smudged slightly along the edge, and I stared at it longer than any man should stare at a piece of cake. The small talk buzzed on, but everything felt distant, like I'd been pushed to the corner of my own life. I finished eating, placed the fork down, and excused myself. The hallway leading to the front door seemed to stretch longer than usual. My jacket hung where I'd left it earlier. I lifted it from the hook and slipped my arms through the sleeves with slow, deliberate care. Outside, the early evening breeze brushed across my face. Cars rolled by on the quiet street, leaving faint trails of noise behind them. I breathed in and let the air settle deep in my lungs before starting the walk toward my car. Each step steady, but heavier than the last. My phone rang the next afternoon while I was sorting receipts at the kitchen table. The number belonged to Marcus, a junior banker at the branch I'd used for years. He usually only called about holiday events or to check whether I wanted updated statements mailed instead of emailed. His voice dropped the moment I answered. "Mr. Harris, I need to tell you something confidential." A knot formed low in my stomach. "Go ahead." "Someone came in yesterday asking for access to your retirement account. Said they were handling things since you're not in a position to manage it anymore." He cleared his throat, uneasy. I couldn't approve it without your signature, so I denied the request. I thought you should know. The room seemed to tilt slightly, not from shock, but from the confirmation of what I'd already begun to suspect. Did they leave a name? I can't disclose that, sir, but you can probably guess. I thanked him and ended the call. The stack of receipts blurred for a moment, though my eyes stayed open. A quiet settled inside me, not peace, not fear, just the weight of realization. Elena called later that same day to remind me of a follow-up appointment. I told her I'd come in, though I didn't mention the bank call. When I arrived, she walked me to an empty exam room before any formal checks. "You're carrying something heavy today," she said, studying me with the kind of attention that sees past a man's age and straight into the truth he won't say. I didn't answer, just sat on the exam table and let the silence stretch. She waited, then asked, "Is your family pushing your boundaries?" The words loosened something in my chest. They're trying to take over things that aren't theirs. Accounts, papers, decisions. Elena crossed her arms. That isn't a misunderstanding anymore. That's a violation. Hearing it named out loud sent a small tremor through my hands. I rested them on my knees to steady the movement. Families do this sometimes when they see a parent slow down, she went on. But what you're describing, that's different. That's about control, not care. Her voice carried no judgment, just an unvarnished honesty I didn't know I needed until it landed. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I exhaled slowly. I thought I was being dramatic, or maybe too proud. You know how it is. When you get older, everyone assumes you're slipping, even if you're not. "You're not slipping," she said firmly. "You're being cornered." I looked down at my shoes, the laces slightly frayed from wear. If I push back, I'll be the villain. If I stay quiet, I'll lose everything. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Silence is a choice. So is letting someone rewrite your life while you're still living it." Something about that sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. "You need to protect yourself," she said, "even if it feels uncomfortable." I nodded, though the motion felt heavy. When I got home, the house was quiet again. My daughter and her husband weren't back yet. The afternoon light sat across the living room in a soft, uneven stripe, the kind of calm that should have felt comforting. I walked to my study, opened the bottom drawer and took out the notebook I'd started. Flipping to a new page, I wrote down Marcus's call, the date, the time, and what he'd told me. The pen moved steadily across the page, each letter settling into place like a stone in a foundation. Then another note. Elena. Boundary. Choice. The words looked small on the paper, but they carried the weight of something larger. A shift. A line forming quietly inside me. Footsteps sounded on the porch, the front door opening a moment later. Their voices floated through the hall, casual and careless, unaware of the conversation I'd had, or the page now drying under my hand. I closed the notebook gently and slid it back into the drawer, feeling the edges of a decision beginning to take shape. The house felt different once I knew what I was dealing with. Not louder or quieter, just tighter, the way a belt feels after the last hole has already been used. I spent the next few mornings sorting through drawers, folders and boxes I hadn't opened in years. Old pay stubs, my pension documents, tax records, the mortgage release letter from when I finally paid off the house. All of it went into new stacks. I created a small system. Papers I needed to copy, papers to lock away, papers to record. My handwriting filled page after page in the notebook, each line steadying me more than the last. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Whenever the house emptied out, I used the time to check online statements and download files before anyone else could get to them. My daughter had accidentally reset my email password twice that week, but I changed it back before she noticed. I added two-factor authentication with Elena's number as the backup. She didn't ask for details, just said, "If you need something protected, use my phone. They can't touch that." In the evenings, when conversation in the living room drifted toward me, I let my phone microphone record quietly from my pocket. Not every word mattered, but certain phrases settled like stones in my memory. "He won't fight us. We'll explain it's for his safety. If he slips again, that's our opening." I saved each recording on a flash drive and tucked it inside an old cigar box beneath a pile of manuals no one cared about. My study, once just a place to store bills, became a small command center. Nothing dramatic, just a desk, a notebook, and a man tired of being handled like luggage. But odd things began happening. One night, my phone rang twice from an unlisted number. No voicemail, no text. Another time, a message arrived saying, "Confirm identity," with a suspicious link underneath. I didn't open it. Instead, I wrote the number in the back of the notebook. Then I noticed the sedan, a silver Toyota parked across the street on Wednesday morning. Same car on Thursday. By Friday, it hadn't moved more than a few inches. Might have been coincidence, but the driver never got out. Sometimes the engine idled, sometimes it didn't. Its presence pressed against the edge of my thoughts. At dinner, my daughter's husband mentioned he'd talked to someone about elder care options and shot me a quick glance, as though measuring whether I'd challenge him. "Why would you do that?" I asked. He gave a short laugh. "Just staying prepared. Responsible people do that." Responsible people. The irony sat between us like a full plate no one planned to eat. Later that night, I waited until the house settled before heading back to my study. The hallway creaked beneath me, but I moved slow enough to keep the noise controlled. In the drawer, my notebook lay where I'd left it, its pages filling faster than I expected. I added a new entry. Silver Toyota, same spot, 3 days. My pen hovered for a moment before I added, "They know I'm not as quiet as before." A floorboard groaned somewhere near the kitchen. I closed the notebook and eased the drawer shut, letting the faint sound dissolve into the rest of the night. The morning it happened, I'd only meant to pour myself a glass of water. My legs wobbled halfway across the kitchen, and the floor rose toward me before I could brace myself. A sharp buzzing filled my skull, then everything thinned out, like sound drifting underwater. I remember clutching the counter edge, losing my grip, and the cold tile against my cheek. When I blinked awake again, the ceiling above me wasn't my house. The antiseptic smell gave the rest away. I tried shifting my hand, but it barely twitched. A blood pressure cuff tightened around my arm while someone adjusted a monitor beside the bed. Voices murmured to my right. My daughter's tone carried that high, breathy worry she used whenever strangers were watching. "He's been slipping for a while," she told the doctor. "We've been trying to keep things together at home." Her husband added, "We think it's time to consider full care authority. He can't manage his affairs anymore." The doctor didn't answer right away. He asked a few pointed questions. How often I'd been confused, whether I'd ever forgotten to take medication, if I'd shown unsafe behavior. My daughter answered before the doctor could even finish. Yes, yes, all the time. None of it was true. I fought to move my hand again, to lift a finger, anything to show I was still here. A tremor rippled up my arm but went nowhere. My tongue felt glued in place. It was like trying to call out from behind a locked door. The doctor leaned over the bed. "Mr. Harris, can you hear me?" I blinked twice. My daughter stepped in immediately. He does that sometimes. Random blinking. It doesn't mean he understands. Her husband held a folder close to his chest. "If you can sign off on power of care, we'll take responsibility. He needs stability." The doctor tapped his pen against the chart, thinking. "Let's slow down and observe him for a moment. A minor stroke can mimic confusion. We'll know more after imaging." They stepped outside into the hallway. Their voices drifted through the cracked door. "I told you this would happen eventually," my son-in-law said. "If we get the paperwork filed now, the house and accounts won't be at risk." "He won't fight it," my daughter replied. "Look at him. He can barely move." A cold shiver crept up my spine. Not fear, something closer to disbelief. They weren't waiting to see if I'd recover. They were positioning themselves, making sure the ink would dry before I stood up again. A nurse wheeled a cart in to check my vitals. While she worked, my daughter returned holding the folder. "Dad, we need you to sign a few forms, just routine things." The pen brushed my fingers. My hand barely lifted. She nudged it closer, guiding it toward the dotted line. "It's for your safety," she whispered. "Don't make this harder." My chest tightened. My lips parted, but no sound came out. A weak groan escaped, enough for the nurse to glance up. She stepped closer, studying my face, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Let him rest," she said. "He just came out of a neurological event." My daughter hesitated, frustrated. "He needs to sign this while he's still awake." The nurse's tone firmed. "Ma'am, step back. If he's had a stroke, he can't legally consent." "You'll have to wait." They didn't argue with her. They simply exchanged a look, quiet, irritated, and stepped into the hallway again. My muscles twitched faintly as the nurse adjusted the blanket. She didn't say much, but her hand paused on my forearm a second longer than necessary, like she was trying to read something in my eyes. I followed the movement of her badge. Different name. Not Elena. She finished with the monitors and left the room. A slow breath settled into my chest. The situation was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't lift a hand to stop it. Every decision, every word, every signature, they were already planning how to take it from me. A shadow moved past the doorway. My daughter's husband stood with his arms crossed, talking into his phone in a low, hurried voice. The shape of the folder tucked under his arm stayed fixed in my mind, steady as a threat. The clock on the wall ticked in uneven beats. I tried moving my hand again, then my foot, then my jaw. A faint pull began in my fingertips. I chased the movement, urging it to spread, even a fraction more. Elena showed up the next morning while the neurologist finished his final checks. She waited by the doorway, arms folded, as if she needed permission to step farther inside. When the doctor left, she closed the curtain halfway and moved closer. "I brought you something," she murmured. A small digital recorder slipped from her scrub pocket into her hand. She didn't switch it on yet, only looked at me long enough to ask a silent question. "Are you steady enough for this?" My fingers twitched in answer. She pressed play. At first, the recording caught background chatter, papers shuffling, someone coughing, a printer whirring. Then my son-in-law's voice cut through. His tone was smoother than usual, almost rehearsed. "We're exploring long-term placement options. He can't live alone anymore." A woman responded, probably the social worker. "You're requesting full placement? That's a significant step."
"It's necessary," he said. "The house is too much for him, and honestly, selling it would give us room to settle a few debts." That word, debts, landed hard. He continued, "If we move quickly, the market's good. We can't afford to let his hesitation ruin the opportunity." The social worker sounded hesitant. "But he hasn't consented to any of this." My daughter chimed in next, her voice soft and vulnerable, the way she sounded whenever she needed people to side with her. "He'll only drag his feet because he's scared. We're helping him. Once he's placed somewhere stable, we can manage his finances properly." Elena paused the recording to let me breathe. This was sent to me by a nurse who overheard the meeting. She wasn't comfortable going directly to administration without proof. My jaw tightened. So they already had a plan. "They've been planning for weeks," she said, "probably months." She let the recorder run again.
My son-in-law lowered his voice. "We can't keep hiding late payments and overdrafts. If the house sells, everything clears. Nobody needs to know how bad things got." The social worker hesitated. "I need to evaluate your father-in-law myself before anything is filed." "Fine, but don't tell him too much," he said. "If he panics, we'll never get him to sign." Elena switched off the recording. She slid it toward me so I could see the timestamp. It was from 2 days before my stroke. The same period when the silver Toyota kept showing up, when my email password changed, when my mail stopped arriving. My fingers tapped the blanket slowly, connecting each piece. The bank attempt, the hidden letters, the push for access, the rush to file paperwork, the sudden concern for safety, the plan to sell my home before I even left the hospital. Greed, plain and simple. They weren't after control because they cared. They were drowning in debt and saw my life as the quickest life raft. Elena settled into the chair beside the bed. "You see it clearly now, don't you?" "I do. They're counting on weakness, yours and the system's. But their finances, that's their crack." The notebook I'd hidden at home flashed through my mind. Every transaction, every recorded comment, every date. All of it documented. And all of it pointed to the same truth. Their motive wasn't concern. It was money. A nurse entered to check my IV. I let my hand rest still against the blanket, though a small pulse of energy ran through my fingers. The nurse adjusted the line and left without noticing anything unusual. Elena leaned closer. "You have the leverage. You just need to gather it in one place." A quiet breath eased out of me. And then, she gave a small shrug. "Then you do what every grown man deserves to do. Decide what happens to your own life." Her words settled in the space between us as footsteps echoed down the hall.
My son-in-law's voice drifted closer, sharp and impatient.
I looked at the recorder again, then at the doorway, then back at Helena. The last piece was finally where it belonged. The meeting took place in a small conference room just down the hall from my hospital room. A long table, 4 chairs, and a stack of folders already waiting. My daughter and her husband arrived early, dressed as if they were attending a job interview. The social worker came next, followed by the hospital attorney who handled patient capacity reviews. A nurse pushed my wheelchair inside. My daughter immediately stepped toward me, voice dripping with concern. "Dad, don't worry. We're here to help you through this." She placed a hand on my shoulder. I didn't react. Her palm hovered a second too long before she pulled it back. The social worker opened her folder. "Mr. Harris, thank you for being here. We're reviewing whether you're able to manage your own affairs after your recent medical event." My son-in-law leaned forward. "We've been concerned for months. He forgets things, misplaces documents. He's not safe living alone or handling finances." I watched him speak with practiced confidence, as though he had rehearsed every line. The attorney nodded slowly, jotting notes. "We'll need specific examples." My daughter jumped in. "He left the stove on twice last month. He can't remember his bank passwords. He's confused all the time." The social worker shifted her attention toward me. "Mr. Harris, do you feel confused?" I lifted my hand, a slow, deliberate movement, and pointed to the folder on the table in front of her. "You want to show us something?" she asked. I nodded. My daughter's husband smirked. "Here we go." The nurse placed the small bag I'd asked her to bring earlier onto the table. Inside were neatly arranged envelopes, the notebook from home, the flash drive, copies of my financial statements, and a few printed transcripts Elena helped me prepare that morning. The attorney raised a brow. "What's all this?" I gestured for the social worker to open the notebook first. She flipped through page after page of dated entries, notes about hidden letters, unauthorized password changes, attempts to access my accounts, comments recorded in my own living room. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something sharper. My daughter leaned over. "Dad, what is this? Why would you?" Her husband cut in. "Anyone can write notes. He's been confused for months. You shouldn't take that seriously." I motioned toward the flash drive next. The nurse plugged it into the laptop the attorney had brought. The room went quiet when the recording from Chapter 8 played. The conversation where they admitted wanting to put me in a home, sell the house, and clear their debts. The first few sentences wiped the confidence clean off my son-in-law's face. The next few pushed my daughter back in her chair. The attorney stopped the recording halfway. "Is that your voice, sir?" he asked my son-in-law. He fumbled. It must have been taken out of context. We were stressed. We didn't mean..." The social worker closed her folder. "This isn't consistent with concern for his welfare. This sounds like financial coercion." My daughter tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "We were only trying to help. He can't manage." I pointed toward the stack of financial records. The attorney skimmed the statements showing their overdrafts, late payments, and credit card debt. He saw the pattern. Desperation on their end, stability on mine. "Mr. Harris appears fully capable of understanding his situation," the attorney said, "and his documentation suggests he has been the one protecting himself from exploitation." The word exploitation landed hard enough that my daughter winced. My son-in-law shook his head rapidly. "This is ridiculous. He's manipulating you.
He probably had help forging these records. The banks confirmed them, the attorney replied.
And the timestamps on the recordings are consistent. The social worker turned to me. Do you want to maintain full control over your affairs, Mr. Harris? I answered with a clear, steady nod. She wrote something on her form. Then that's what will happen. This review is closed. My daughter's breath hitched. Wait, you're not even going to hear us out? The social worker didn't look up. I heard you. I also heard the recording. My son-in-law rose abruptly, palms flat on the table. You're ruining everything. Do you understand that? We were trying to fix our lives and yours at the same time. The attorney gestured to the nurse. Please escort him to the hallway while we complete the paperwork. The nurse moved behind my chair as my son-in-law sputtered. My daughter reached out as if to stop the nurse, but her hand froze in mid-air when I lifted my gaze to meet hers. No anger, no pleading, just clarity. I gripped the wheelchair armrests and eased myself upright. My body trembled, but the motion was my own, and everyone in the room saw it. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I walked out with the nurse's hand lightly steadying my elbow, leaving the two of them behind as the social worker asked them to remain for further questioning. The hallway felt long and quiet. My steps weren't strong, but they were mine. The discharge papers were still warm in my hand when I stepped out of the hospital. Elena waited by the curb, ready to drive me home. She didn't ask questions. She didn't congratulate me. She simply unlocked the door and said, "Buckle up, you've got things to do." She was right. The first stop wasn't home. It was the attorney's office. A young paralegal escorted me to a quiet room, and the lawyer reviewed the documents I'd prepared, bank statements, recordings, the social worker's report, and the notes from the hospital review. He adjusted his glasses. You have grounds to revoke every authorization they held, including medical and financial, and the evidence of exploitation is substantial. We went through each form slowly. My hand trembled once, but the pen still found the signature lines. We'll file today, he said. Within 48 hours, they'll be removed from any legal standing over your affairs. Another document slid toward me, an amendment to my will. This time, I didn't hesitate. Remove both of them. The lawyer nodded. Who do you want as your executor? I gave him a name, a cousin who lived 2 states over, someone steady, quiet, and impossible to manipulate. From there, we drove to the police station. A detective met us in a side office, flipping through the folder I brought. His expression hardened as he listened to the recordings Elena had copied. Financial exploitation of an elder is a serious charge, he said, and intentionally misrepresenting medical capacity is another. He asked a long series of questions. I answered at my own pace, letting the words fall without emotion. He never rushed me. When the interview ended, he closed the folder and stood. We'll begin the investigation immediately. Elena walked beside me as we left the station. The sky looked ordinary, grey, still, almost indifferent. But something in my chest loosened for the first time in months. At home, the front steps felt steeper than usual, but I climbed them without her help. The spare key I kept hidden under the railing fit the lock easily. Inside, the air carried a faint mix of detergent and old carpet, familiar enough to settle my nerves. I sat for a moment in the front room before unpacking the bag from the hospital. Then I called the locksmith. He arrived quickly. Changing every lock, he asked. Every one. While he worked, I walked through each room slowly, touching the back of chairs, brushing dust from tabletops. opening drawers I'd avoided for months, not searching for anything, just reclaiming the space. The locksmith handed me the new keys. "You need extra copies?" "Just one." After he left, the house settled into its own quiet. No footsteps in the hallway, no whispered conversations I wasn't meant to hear, no hands reaching for papers I didn't offer. I brewed a cup of tea and let the steam rise in small curls from the mug. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Later that evening, an email from the police appeared on my phone. Confirmation that the case had been formally opened. Another message from the lawyer arrived minutes after. Filings completed, protections updated, all powers revoked. I read each line carefully, then set the phone aside. The house didn't need fixing. Nothing needed rearranging. Nothing demanded my attention. I walked to the living room window and watched a few cars pass on the street. No silver Toyota. No unfamiliar faces waiting. Just the ordinary rhythm of a neighborhood going on with its life. My hands rested lightly on the windowsill, not clenched, not shaking. For years I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace meant keeping quiet, that my silence helped hold the family together, but all it ever did was make me disappear. Now the space around me held shape again, my shape. I turned away from the window, crossed the room, and placed the single key on the table, its metal surface catching a faint glint as it settled. Then I sat down, letting the calm stretch around me, steady and unforced. I sat there for a long time, listening to the house breathe the way an old place does when it finally has room to exhale. No voices pressing in from the next room. No footsteps waiting for their chance to take something from me. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the warm creak of the floorboards adjusting under their own weight. It struck me how unfamiliar that kind of quiet had become. Not the uneasy quiet of walking on eggshells, but the kind that wraps itself around you like a worn jacket, shaped to your shoulders and no one else's. My doctor told me recovery would happen in small steps. Turns out, life works the same way. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Those are loud emotions, and I'd had enough noise for one lifetime. What I felt instead was a slow settling inside my chest, like soil after a hard rain. A man needs that. Solid ground beneath him, even if he had to fight to claim it back. I didn't call my daughter that night. Didn't check whether the police had contacted them yet. Didn't replay the recordings or the meetings or the accusations. I let all of it sit where it belonged, behind me. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just finished. As the sun dipped behind the neighbour's maple tree, the room dimmed, and I reached over to switch on the lamp beside me. The light warmed the space around my chair, soft and steady. I held my tea between both hands, letting the heat work its way into my fingers, and breathed the quiet in more deeply. This house had seen me at my worst. It had watched me give too much, bend too far, stay silent too long. But it was watching something else now. A man who finally understood that dignity isn't loud, and freedom doesn't always arrive with a shout. Sometimes it comes gently. One signed form, one changed lock, one clear step at a time. And for the first time in years, I felt the evening settle around me without taking anything away.